Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works. It's new project day. Yay! Today we're starting work on this, the Mi-4 Hound by HobbyBoss in 1/72nd scale. I like helicopters as model subjects and have built over 18 examples in 1/72nd scale and have a further 20 kits in my stash. The Mi-4 is significant in that it marked the start of the Mill Design Bureau's advancement towards producing some of the world's most powerful heavy-lift helicopters. The Mi-4 was designed in response to this, the Sikorsky S-55 or H-19, which had its first flight in 1949 and was introduced in service in 1950. By 1951, the U.S. was using them and other piston-engine helicopters in Korea with great success. The Soviet Union took notice, and the Mill Design Bureau was given the task to produce an equivalent helicopter. Mill first flew the Mi-4 in 1952, and it was introduced in service in 1953. Although it broadly followed the same design as the S-55, even having the same shopping cart front landing gear, the Mi-4 was far more capable design. Originally planned for a 1,000 horsepower engine versus the 700 horsepower unit found in the S-55, the unavailability of this engine resulted in a 1,675 horsepower unit being used instead. This extra power meant that the Mi-4 could be larger and have a greater payload. It also had a more useful cabin arrangement with clamshell rear doors and could accommodate a light field car or artillery piece. One could argue that it was also more capable than the U.S. Sikorsky H-34 or S-58, which first flew in 1954. The S-58 only had a 1,500 horsepower engine and had a much less versatile cabin arrangement. The legacy of the Mi-4 can be seen in the fuselage of the later Mi-8. You can see here the same shape and the clamshell doors under the high tail. So let's take a look at the box. There's a nice painting on the front. On the side panel here we have a brief history, and it'll show, well, this is both the Soviet paint schemes, and on the other side here we have the Chinese paint scheme, and then we've got some legal notices here, and then we've got nothing on the back. Take a look inside. We have 3 bags of sprues, 1 clear, 1 with the main fuselages, and a 3rd bag with a couple more sprues in it. Got instructions, and finally we have this nice color insert, and it shows us both paint schemes, which are very, very similar. Darn near identical, really. And of course the decals. Taking a look at the instructions, we've got English, and I assume this is Chinese, seeing as this was produced in China. And of course what we have is the standard read before operation, general tips for building plastic models, please don't eat the parts. And then on the back side, we have a sprue map and a decal map. On the inside, we have the assembly instructions. Now, it's not really broken up into steps. It basically takes us from the cockpit, and then this is the gunner's gondola underneath. And then we have the cargo compartment, bringing the fuselage halves together, and then the rear clamshell doors. There's quite a number of steps just to put those together, so it looks like they're going to be well detailed. And then we've got the under details, putting the transparencies on, and then we've got some rotor blade assembly here. Now, as you can see, the rotor blades get assembled here, and then you kind of go back here to put them on. So it's not like there's a step-by-step thing. It rather relies on the builder to to look at it and say, well, obviously I have to do this before this. I don't think this would give anybody any trouble putting this model together. Now, it's worth noting that the nose has no accommodation for opening and there's no engine supplied. So if you want to have the nose open, you're going to have to do some surgery and you're going to have to source the appropriate engine. There are two schemes supplied. This one is the Russian Air Force, so I'm not sure. I mean, it seems to me this should say the Soviet Air Force, because I can't imagine that any of these were still in service past 1995. So I think their intention is this was supposed to be the Soviet Air Force. This one is the People's Liberation Air Force, in other words, the Chinese Air Force. And quite frankly, the only difference is the markings, the decals here. Here's our decals, and they look like they are fairly well printed. And we'll get to see those fairly soon because I am building this right now after all. Now to look at the sprues. This, of course, is the transparency, and here's our main cockpit transparency. And the definition between the actual windows and the framing is really quite pronounced. I don't think this is going to give anybody difficulty in painting. And here are the side windows, which bulge out a little bit so that the pilot and co-pilot can see down. And this, and possibly these, are for the under gondola. And then, of course, these are for the portholes on the sides of the fuselage. Very well molded. I don't really see any flash on there. And this sprue has, this is the underside of the fuselage. This looks to be the floor. And of course, here are the rotor blades. Now, the rotor blades are not molded with any sort of droop in them, so I think I'm going to have to introduce a little bit of droop myself. This is the very nose. This looks like an internal bulkhead. We have two seats, obviously, for the cockpit. Interesting that one is a different design than the other. Tail rotor is all one piece, but very, very well molded. You can see the detail in there. Of course, these little nubbies are going to have to be cut off. And some of the other finer detail parts. Here is the collective levers and the control sticks. Very, very nice. This is the second sprue with assorted parts on them. We have the landing gear, the rear landing gear wheels. They are molded in halves. And here's the nose gears, the shopping cart wheels. The gondola for the gunner, and these are our rear clamshell doors, and they've got a lot of detail molded inside them, so certainly makes you want to have them molded open. And these are the cockpit doors. So those little triangular windows, they are actually for these windows here. So here's our sprue with the fuselage halves, and of course, you know, it has the two halves on it. And this appears to be the cockpit floor. This is the instrument cluster. Let's get a close-up on it. There we go, that looks quite nice. I don't recall seeing a decal for that, so it's going to require a little bit of skill in painting, but I don't see any problems. And this is another internal part. I like the soundproofing quilting on there. And as I mentioned before, overall the fuselage is this very similar shape to the S-55. The only difference is whereas the S-55 has that rounded butt on it with a fillet, this one, the rear end actually opens up clamshell wise, giving, as the dog and the kids come home from a walk. Anyway, this is where the clamshell doors go. And if we flip around, look at the inside, the internal detail is not fantastic. All it is just some rudimentary ribs, and of course There's some sink marks which may or may not have to be filled. It depends on how noticeable they are or how anal you are. But I'm looking forward to building this. I think this is going to be really cool. Alright, so as you can probably tell, we're back at the clutter zone for this build. This helicopter is quite a bit smaller than that modern wrecker we were doing. I've just separated the fuselages from the sprue just so I can make sure there's not going to be any unpleasant surprises in terms of fit. And as you can see, it goes together really well. And overall, you can see that even though the superficial resemblance is to the S-55, this helicopter is more size-wise to the S-58, especially in terms of width. The tail is way longer than the S-58. So, and I don't know if I earlier gave you a view of the interior. Not a lot of relief to it, but certainly more than just a plain interior. So the first step is going to be pretty much get that focused, starting on the cockpit. And then we're going to move to the main cabin. Something I feel is worthwhile noting is these rectangular lugs here. Now, the floor of the cockpit actually fits into these lugs, and it's a really, really nice fit. And I've already put the other fuselage half here against it, and it doesn't keep them from going together well. And this is really, really nice. Shows a lot of engineering detail put into the model, and it's almost Tamiya-like in the way that it slots together. And once again, as a trial fit, I'm just holding fuselage halves together. And I've added the back wall of the cockpit and this horizontal bulkhead here, which the rotors are going to end up being attached to, because I just want to make sure that everything goes in there and everything is happy before I get into painting or anything like that, or adding the seats. And it certainly does go together well. And this line that goes up at an angle, that's actually the drive shaft going from the radial engine here in the nose up to the transmission. And it's a feature of the S-58 and the S-55 as well. Prior to painting the instrument cluster, I've glued it onto a stick. Makes it a lot easier to handle. So here is our instrument panel, all painted up. They don't supply a decal, but I think this is going to be acceptable. And here are the cyclic controls and the control sticks all painted up. And I really like the detail on the cyclic controls. Better than just a quarter circle with a stick sticking out of it. Now, because I'm a sad fellow, I decided I was going to add the seat belts to the seats. Just gives it a little bit more animation than if they're just left plain. Now, I know these don't actually have little etched metal buckles on them. I'll just paint a little bit of silver on the ends of them. And this is just simply Tamiya masking tape, cut very, very thin and just stuck on. And what I'll do is I'll paint them kind of a brownish color. And like I said, I'll put a little bit of silver at the end where the buckles would be. And there's our seatbelts painted up. Alright, the seats and the control sticks and the cyclic has all been glued into the cockpit, as well as the instrument panel, which looks awfully low, but that might be the way it really goes. We'll know in a second. Basically the rotor mask, I painted that gunmetal, and the floor of this compartment here, I painted that steel. But I think we're getting a good start to this build. And here, test fit into the fuselage is our cockpit. Now, I'm not sure what's going to be going on here, whether or not we're going to see that space between
the instrument panel and the body right here. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but if we do see it, I'll end up probably putting some circles on the back to represent the backs of the instruments and that sort of thing. But I won't know until I put that transparency piece on there, just to test fit. But at any rate, as I said a couple seconds ago, I'm happy with how things are going, and I think this is a good place to leave off this episode. So thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.